Sivrid Brumbach. Live in the Mid-Realm. I'm been around the SCA for a long time, but have taken a break and just come back recently. So I'm going to go about and talk to you about, we're going to go through a little bit of the, what is, what we talk about in Anglo Saxon or Germanic lyre, what it is. We're going to go through some of the historical finds, as well as the one existent find that was not actually ever in a archaeological dig, but actually found in someone's barn. And then we'll go through a little bit about how they're played, some of the tunings that are possible for them. I'll do some demonstration of some of the techniques. And we'll also talk a little bit about, if you're interested in saying, well, how do I get a hold of one of these, or how do I build one of these, what kind of resources are available. So that's kind of the overview of where we're going to go tonight. So first, let's see. So what is a lyre? And so we have here, this is an Anglo Saxon lyre. So it's typically somewhere between 5 to 7 strings, a lyre. The lyre is formed up. It has a body, which has a hollow sound box. On it sits a bridge to keep the strings off of it. They're either tied to the end or tied to a tail piece. Only one tail piece has actually been found, so there's been a lot of discussion about how common tail pieces actually were, that are then run up to the yoke. The yoke is solid, but it can either be attached or a single piece with the entire body of the lyre. And there are then somewhere between 5 and 7 pegs. Typically, almost every yoke that's been found has actually had 6 pegs in it, or 6 holes for pegs. And then it's strung with strings. So again, this is all parallel to the soundboard. And then this spot here is hollow. You can just put your hand right through it. So if you see the lyre right behind me here, let's see, you can't see that because I'm having a screen shared, but if you look at the lyre, I'll show you that later, but if you see that, that's basically hollow through there in the strings, so you can reach through the strings. And so this is similar to a Greek lyre in the fact that the strings are strung across the sounding box. But it's also different that the sound box is a solid sound box and the yoke is a rigid piece that doesn't, and then it has pegs in it for tuning. So this example here is actually a drawing of the Oberflacht lyre, which is a grave find. And so where do we find examples of these? Existing examples are we find some from archaeological digs, and mostly those are found either as grave goods or as cultural layers. Cultural layers being basically in the trash or something like that. And the grave goods are limited to earlier in period, largely because after a certain point of Christianization, graves were no longer, or people were no longer buried with grave goods. And so earlier digs we find with grave goods, some from the 500s, some from the 600s, and then they stop being buried with the person, just like the same problem with swords, same problem with other things as far as a historical record. And so we see those. We also see pieces of lyres, such as bridges, that are actually found in burial and just in basically in cultural layers. And there's the one example, the Kravik lyre, which was actually found in Norway hanging in a barn. We also have illustrations from periods, so a variety of different illustrations. David is very frequently depicted playing a lyre in illustrations in different psalteries. And it's also there in the Scandinavian countries. There are a variety of different carvings that have illustrations of lyres as well. So this is, so there's a Hilleberg did a thesis actually in 2015, putting together basically the existing studies, just cataloging them and describing the main studies that have been, sites that have been found. And so those range from 5th century in Abingdon in England, up till finds in Norway, which are up to the 13th century. These are then grave finds, or cultural layer finds, and not each one of these is a lyre. As a matter of fact, only one of these is a complete lyre. Most of them are pieces, parts of a lyre, that have then been reconstructed into an idea of what they're like. So, for instance, the very famous Sutton Hoo lyre, I'll show you a picture of the actual pieces that were found, and it's actually not very much of the lyre. And so again, these were found in different grave goods, ranging from the from the 5th century to the 13th. The Conservero one is just undated, so that's why it's just sitting at the end there. So a lot of the ones, as I said, a lot of the ones we find in burials are going to be this left column, where there's a lot of pieces from burials for migration age Europe. So where are they found? This is just an example. This is a map from her thesis, which lists the locations on the map just where they've been found. So a variety of them in through southeastern England, into northern England, throughout what becomes the Holy Roman Empire, and then up into the Nordic countries. And so, for instance, and also in through Denmark, in pieces which are now Germany. I think 16 is now actually had to be. So in Germany, and was in Denmark, or considered Denmark at the time. So here's an example of what one of those finds might look like. Here, this is a picture of the Sutton Hoo lyre pieces from the British Museum. And you see it has two very nice fittings here, which are actually covering up a joint between the yoke and the arms. The arms are actually hollowed out. So this was found this is what was found originally when they found this. This was out of the Sutton Hoo ship. And they originally put it together and tried to put it together as a frame harp. So what you think of typically when you think of the word harp, especially when you tie it to Ireland. But they realized that's a completely wrong model of what this is. This is a yoke and arms to a lyre. The arms are hollowed out, and which we'll see is how the sounding works, and then it has a piece of a soundboard as well. And so this was made all out of maple, one of the two common pieces of wood that would be used for the body. It has very fancy mortise and tenon joints that are angled in two different directions, holding in the yoke, and it's held in by compression, and then those are covered up by these brasses, ornamental brasses. And so the people, I have yet to try one of these particular mortise and tenon constructions. The builders who build these have commented this is one of the hardest attachments they've ever had to build from furniture makers who are normally used to making mortise and tenon joints. The way this blind one works, it's not particularly easy to do. So here's another example. This is the Oberflecht from grave alternately 31 or 37. In one report it's 31, in one report it's 37. It's the same grave. So this is the drawing from the original report. It was found, this lyre piece was found in amongst a variety of other grave goods. This is a more detailed drawing of this is the face piece as it was found in the ground, and then these are the pieces that were excavated out. And you can see it has a hollow arm, cross-section, hollow body, and then it had a maple covering on the end. It has a peg at the end to which either the strings or a tail piece would have been tied. There's no way to know for certain how many strings it was. The assumption is just 6 because that's the most common number that was found. And in cross-section you can see it actually goes and gets thinner at the top and gets a little thicker as it moves towards the bottom. And I'll talk about cross-section in a little bit here. The Oberflecht 84, so these were both found in the Oberflecht grave sites. This is a reconstruction on the left. It's not the original. And it was actually, that's supposed to say World War II. It was lost in Berlin in World War II because Russian soldiers came in and drank the alcohol it was preserved in and tossed the lyre out on the ground. This was in the museum, in the Volkerkunde Museum in Berlin. This one, the yoke is attached by pegs, so it's pegged in. It's a separate piece. But everything else is solid construction, and so it's an odd one. There was a fairly large chunk of it still existent, but unfortunately that was destroyed. The Trossingen lyre is the most complete lyre set that's been lyre that's been found in a grave. This was found in 2002 in a dig in Trossingen, and so this one's actually pretty amazing. It's the only thing it's missing is it doesn't have a tailpiece, so it's uncertain whether there was one, and it obviously doesn't have any strings. The strings would have been gut, and so they would have. Well, actually, what this does tell us is that they weren't metal strings, because we would have found residue or metal strings if they were there. It still has a complete bridge. It has all 6 pegs. The pegs were a mixture of willow and ash. It appears the willow were probably original. The ash were probably replacements carved as a peg broke and just carved out and replaced. The bridge is actually willow. Everything else is maple, and it has elaborate decorations on it. So if you actually see in the very back here, you can see just a little bit. There's a reproduction made by Jan van Capel, who actually has done, and what these are is this is done much the same way you would decorate ivory. Is these are carved in and then filled with carbon ash, and so you can see there's actually 2 ranks of soldiers facing each other. There's knotwork up the side, and the entire back is decorated as well. So this is a very ornately decorated instrument. Once again, the Trossingen, just like the Oberflecht one that I showed before, was part of grave goods. It was found together with someone who was buried with their swords, with shields. So it was someone who was probably, in addition to being a musician, was also some sort of warrior. This one's also interesting at the yoke. Unlike all the ones found in the British Isles, the yoke is actually a single piece attached. So this is all one piece that is then hollowed out and the soundboard attached to. So the yoke is actually a single piece. It's not mortised in or anything like that. So it's a part of the original piece of wood. A smaller lyre. So most of the other ones are around 80 centimeters long. The Cullen lyre is about 2/3 that length. This is a reproduction of it. On the right is a picture of the fragments that were found. So we know we have the yoke. We have it has 6 strings in it. We have pieces of the arm, we have the size, we have a piece of the soundboard, and the soundboard for the Cullen lyre was actually attached. Most of the other ones we've seen have been glued on, probably with a hide glue or an animal glue. This one is actually, the face is attached with brads, brass nails all around the outside. So I'll go back one thing. On the Trossingen lyre, it's almost all glued in, except there's a repair. It's actually nailed together. There's 3 nails that were in it held together. So originally it was probably glued, and that's why they're pretty sure it wasn't nailed originally, because it's only that repair that has nails. So that's a lot of the big pieces. That's typical. Most of the other lyre finds are actually smaller finds than that. They may be pieces of the yoke, pieces of the arms, pieces of the body. Another thing that's actually found, and a large number of these are found in a variety of bridges. So the bridge is what conducts the vibrations from the string to the soundboard to help it to amplify the sound. And so these are 3 different examples of bridges from the museum at Dorstedt. And so these each, as you see, you can tell how many strings the instrument had because it has 6 slots in the bridge. Some of them are shaped in this kind of castle turret kind of shape. Some of them are solid. You notice these are actually amber. A lot of them are Baltic amber. And so these are from a time period where the migration area Germans or the Vikings both were doing heavy trade with the Russians. And so we have amber, we have wood, either willow or pine. Most of the Scandinavians ones were pine. Some of them are actually unspecified in the dig finds. There are also at least one Scandinavian one made out of antler and one Scandinavian one cast out of bronze. So a variety of materials were used for those bridges. So the willow one is the one that belongs to the Trossingen lyre. A lot of the other ones are then the ones that are found by themselves are frequently these either amber or wood ones that are carved, have the distinctive notches in them for the bridge. There's actually one that was just found in this last year, which is not in that list that I had for another bridge. This is the Kravik lyre. So this was found in Kravik in Norway on a farmhouse wall. So it's the only one not from an archaeological dig. It dates somewhere to the 14th to 16th century. There's some discussion because the wood, when they did some carbon dating on a fragment, came back closer to the 16th century. But from design and everything else, they would have anticipated it to have been from the 14th century. This is typical of the Scandinavian lyre, or this is the only full body of the Scandinavian lyre. It's made out of pine. This one actually has 7 strings, and I'll talk about that when we get into tuning. There's a reason you might want a 7th string. And again, made out of pine. There was no soundboard or bridge found with it. It was basically falling apart, hung up on someone's wall as decoration. And then someone recognized exactly what it was in the early 20th century. So as I mentioned before, they're made largely out of maple or oak, so hardwood. The pegs are typically made out of willow and alder, and the bridges are what I just listed on the previous slide. So there's also some graphic depictions of some of these. So, for instance, this is the altar of Albertus. It's from the Guelph treasure. This is a treasure that has a little bit of controversy associated with it because it was sold under pressure, extreme pressure, duress, in the early late 1930s to Goering from a Jewish family to be a present for Hitler, and so it is currently held in the Berlin Staatsmuseum. But there's a lot of discussion about repatriating to its original owner because the original owner very definitely didn't just sell it for good measure. And so here's a zoom in on that. You see this is a typical round lyre, so it's similar in shape both to the Kravik or to the cone lyre. So we have depictions like that, and depictions of David. So it's typically David who is actually seen holding one of these lyres. These are different psalteries, either from the continent or from the islands. And you can see this one on the Vespersius psaltery looks much more like a typical Anglo Saxon lyre from what we see from the Sutton Hoo fragments or from the other fragments from different ones from the island. And this one looks much more like closer to something you might see similar to the Köln, but not exactly. And so in German, sometimes these are also referred to not just as they're called a Gotha or translated as a round lyre. So there's also some pictures in carvings. So this is a carving of a lyre from the 8th century in a stone. And there's also carvings. This is a carving in a 14th century drinking vessel. You see there's a carving and it has the shape which is similar to the Kravik lyre shape. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what we know about what exists in the record for the Anglo-Saxon lyre or the Germanic lyre. It's called so many different things because there's no real thing. It's always given a nationality or name to distinguish it from what we think of as a classical or a Greek lyre. So there's a couple different tunings that are used, one of which is a diatonic tuning, a hexatonic major. So it's the major chord, just the first 6 notes of the major chord. And in Hucbald in the 9th century, he actually mentions when he describes a hexatonic or a hexachord as being the way you tune your lyre. So that's a pretty good indication that this is what was one of the predominantly ways that they were used and tuned. And so, for example, that's just in a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, G major. I've typically tuned mine, actually. I list this because this is an A major scale. That's the way mine is typically tuned. People also will perform in a major pentatonic scale, which gives you a full octave as well, and G, D, E, C, A, G. And so it just gives you... It's very nice to play melodies on a pentatonic scale. It's very easy. It's hard to hit a wrong note just because they're all fairly a good set of they're consonant with each other when you're just playing that scale. So those are 2 major sets when people who are playing and doing reenactments. That's the more common tunings that you actually expect to see. So I have linked to a website here which has some useful tools in it. And he actually has, I'm going to bring this over here, he actually has a couple tools here from which you can actually see, for instance, you can set figure out what strings you need or how you need to tune it based on a scale. So for instance, if you want C major scale, it will tell you these are the notes you need to play it, tune it in. If you want F major scale, that's the tuning. It's also nice because it gives you a whole variety of other alternate tunings you can use. So for instance, the major pentatonic, or take your choice of other modes. So if we go to major, and you can say, get the chords for the first 6 notes, and we can actually pull up what chords you can easily play in that tuning. And so this is useful if you're used to seeing music that you want to play along with that you have chords for. Now, likelihood that they didn't play chords this way on the instrument is actually pretty high. There's a lot of argument whether or not chords were used before about the 12th century. But it does give you the option, and actually will list out what kind of chords you can play in any given tuning. The other nice thing about that particular website is it also will say, if you just want to say based on what half step, I want a whole step, half step, or just all whole step tunings, I can put that in and get that as well. So this is a convenient tool just to see what you can, how you might tune a lyre in given different ideas about what you might want to play with. Close that down. And again, so that gives tuning options, transposition, and a chord map. So I'm going to switch over and let's see, I'm going to stop sharing here. But I'm going to go through a couple different ways that the instrument can be played. I'll show you how played much more like a harp when you're just plucking tunes or plucking chords. And then there's also something which is very characteristic of the lyre called block and strum. And that's you can play single notes, you can play a single note with a drone, or you can play chords. And so I'm going to stop sharing here and hop back and switch over here. So this is then Trossingen lyre, which I built, and so, or modeled after the Trossingen. And you notice it has a wrist strap on it to hold it in, so you can hold it in easily. So your one hand's free. One hand can sit up against the strings very easily. So there's 6 strings. You have 5 fingers. You can't block every string, but you can block a certain number of the strings, so you can always keep one free, and it'll sound even if you strum it. So just to give an idea of what this sounds like, so if I'm just playing an individual note, so that's Brian Boru's March, and so easily played, and it's played. You can play it just like a harp. There is no indication whether it was tuned the high notes close to you and the low notes away, like you would play a harp, or the high notes or the low notes close to you, the high notes away, like you would play a guitar or tune a guitar. And so I actually have mine tuned lowest notes towards me, highest notes away from me. I play both harp and guitar. It doesn't seem to cause any confusion one way or the other. But you can figure out then. So that's the first 6 notes of a major scale. And as I mentioned, this is tuned in A. So you can also pluck dyads, so 2 notes together, like the first and the fifth of a chord. And so it's very easy to play fifth chords. So those are ones without the third in them. So a lot of medieval music would not have necessarily played the third, especially if this was tuned in fifths, with perfect fifths, because the third would sound out. Or you can also play it with, you have some choices with playing the third in there as a chord. This, for instance, is A major and B minor. So you're playing the first, third, and fifth, and the way it's tuned, that's a major chord and a minor chord. And so those can be played. And and actually gives you a whole variety of different things you can play with that. So Bredowin just asked what type of strings I use. This set is strung with what's called Nile gut. It's an artificial gut string. It would have probably been, the advantage of it is it stays a little more stable in changing humidity than a gut string does. You can also use nylon strings, guitar strings. Nylon guitar strings are a commonly used set. And then some people will actually use steel strings. You have to change some of the construction to use steel. It's a little louder with the steel. But for, sitting around a room playing, perfectly fine volume from this. And again, because you only have six strings, you don't have the seventh of the chord. And again, in earlier period music, the seventh was not a commonly used note in a lot of the tunes. That doesn't hinder from a lot of things like that. And but I found that in some period music, even starting in around the 12th century music, I want that seventh, which is why people do actually make reproductions of even this style of lyre. They'll just push it a little wider and add a seventh string. It's really hard to put a seventh string in here with the hand spacing because it's hard to fit a seventh string and still be able to fit your hand well. Does the material for the bridge change the sound? I honestly don't know. I only have my particular one's made with a walnut bridge as a hardwood bridge. That's what I happen to have sitting around in a nice spot. And I know some people who have made them with an amber bridge seem to think they play really well, they sound really well, and if I remember right, I think they were saying it was essentially just a little brighter. So again, you can play single chords or dyads, and you can pluck those. The other thing you can do, which is kind of unique for a lyre setup, or it's actually also seen in some of the Finnish instruments, either the gusli or the kantale, you can block off notes so they don't sound. So I have my hand against 3 strings here, and I can strum, and I can get a chord because that's the remaining notes that sound. And so I block the notes I don't want to sound, and strum the ones I do. And so that's why it's called block and strum. And block and strum can be used to play individual notes. So here, if I block all 5 strings, or 5 of the 6 strings, and I strum, so I can play individual notes while strumming just by blocking that string. And so in this case, I'm just have one finger on each string and move the fingers between move the fingers between the strings so there's always one open. And so, for instance, let's see. So you can play tunes that way, where you're strumming and you're just letting that one note sound. Another way to play that is to have, the other typical block and strum technique is to have 5 of the strings blocked and one of them always open as a drone. And so I can do the same thing. Yeah. I normally don't play this way. I'm doing that wrong. So you can play tunes that way by just changing which finger you lift and then having it played. I need to practice that method more. I normally play just either straight chords or I play with just moving the finger around and opening one string. So there's different ways you can do that. Like I said, you can play individual chords. And if this is tuned in G, it plays pretty much everything you typically use in a lot of folk music, which is A minor, G, E minor, C. Uh, you can play a D fifth, so it's neither major nor minor. And what you can't play is an F because there is no string for F. And so that gets you a lot of folk music very easily played with that. Question there was how much pressure do I apply to block the strum? Just enough to keep it from sounding. So I'm not putting a lot of pressure on there. It's just kind of holding it up. The wrist strap is holding it mostly in place, but I just have enough pressure to keep it from sounding, and that will give me my chord. And then for the strum, there is some evidence they haven't found with these. They've never found a plectrum or a pick with them. They have found picks around, and there also are medieval instruments from the same period, from the Stuttgart Psalter or it's either Stuttgart or Utrecht. They actually have a fretted stringed instrument which is actually strummed, and it's strummed with a plectrum, and so they're kind of peanut shaped, or they're typically made out of the plectrums that are found are typically made out of thin shells. I use a guitar pick. I know green guitar pick's not exactly the most period choice, but works just as well and can generate a little more volume than just your fingers. So for what gauges of string are for the comparable guitar strings, people use a mixture of, I think they're usually using a medium set. I'd have to look. I'll pull up a link here. There's a link actually in those few pages further down that actually links you to some resources for some of that for when you're talking about building your own or buying one. So I'm going to switch back at this point and share back the screen again. And so there are a couple really good resources if you're interested, for instance, in building your own lyre. Jan van Capel in the Netherlands is a luthier. He makes all kinds of interesting period and non-period music instruments, and so he actually has, this is his blog, and on his blog he actually was the person who built the reconstruction for the Trossingen lyre for the museum, and also built one for the in Dordrecht Museum in the Netherlands. And so he had fairly good access to a lot of these lyres to measure them, and so he has actually published a set of plans for pretty much every reconstruction of all the existing lyres that have been that have sufficient more than just a bridge to actually be reproduced. And he sells that. I think there's about a dozen different plans in his set. Michael King is an English gentleman who also has been working on doing reproduction lyres. He makes very nice ones, but he also sells plans. He sells kits, which means he's done the first part of the work. He's cut out the wood, he's hollowed out the wood on the router, and then leaves the rest of it to you, and actually has a whole series of videos on how to shape the top, how to I think he's actually drilled out the pegs, and then how to actually do that. Then also there are a couple SCA resources that are actually very good. Kravik in his miscellany had an article on constructing a lyre, and so he has a little more about that. One of the things about his is that I think he actually assumes a fairly thick body to the lyre. One of the interesting things about the lyre, from when they found the Trossingen one, because I think Kravik's article actually dates from before, and I know Tora Sharptooth dates from before they found the Trossingen lyre. It's interesting that the thickness of the lyre itself, of the body, is only about an inch. And a lot of people were making out of 2-inch dimensional lumber. It really only needs to be about an inch thick to get the sound out of it. and to be consistent, and it also makes it very light. So those are a couple different locations. In addition to that, there's a Facebook group um, called the Lyre, which Jan van Kapel and Michael King are the administrators for, and they're actually very good about answering questions. They're let's see, a couple reenactors who also do a lot of performances using Lyre. Spike, I'm trying to remember his last name, also posts there. He's posted a number of tutorial videos there as well. What archaeological evidence is there for the wrist strap, and what were they made from? The evidence for the wrist strap is there are a couple pieces where there are partial pieces sitting right on the edge, and then the Trossingen, actually, I didn't put this on mine, has pegs both here and here through the body, through the solid part of the body, which likely would have been attachment points for a leather strap for holding. They had leather ends to them on there. The assumption is about the wrist strap is there would probably be a small piece, like a tablet woven piece of they may be longer, but it seems to me that they're just a short tablet woven piece. It works well to have it just long enough to wrap around your wrist once and then hold it in place. So I actually threw in a couple slides that aren't in the handout. This was just when I was making mine. I realized I hadn't put anything like that in here. This is the original piece of maple, just cut out with a jigsaw, and then hollowed out. I used a router to hollow mine out. The common ways are either to use a router and a jig, or to use a drill press and a mortise bit, just to hollow them out. Because the back piece is actually fairly thin. You only have a couple millimeters. It's like 7 millimeters thick from the back to the opening. And then this is also planed down so that the top end by the yoke is about 3/4 as thick or half as thick as the piece of as the sound box is. So it tapers to be thinner at the top. So this is after it was assembled with the soundboard. The Trossingen lyre is actually the only one found that we know had sound holes. The sound holes are very small. They actually only a couple millimeters across. People who have done experimentation with this find that you can put a big sound hole in here like a guitar. The disadvantage is it just doesn't project as far. These small ones actually do a great job of projecting out away from the body of the lyre. This is the bridge. It's a piece of walnut that I had happen sitting around the right size that I carved down. These pegs are actually made out of oak. Again, I had an oak dowel I could shave down and get the right size. They're shaved with a peg tool, the same tool you would actually use for making a violin peg, just to get them the right taper. All the pegs that were found are tapered into tapered holes, so they stay in better. They also stay attached better. These ones, there are a couple different styles of pegs that were found. This style of peg needs some sort of tool to turn it. I actually right now haven't built that tool. I use pliers. I cheat, but there's assumed, they've never actually found one. Assumed you have to have a tool to turn that because your fingers are not strong enough to turn that. There are other ones which have larger, more typical like a violin peg that have a larger space to get a thumb on to turn them. And so both styles did exist. And this took me about 2 weeks to put together. It's not a lot. It's actually a fairly simple instrument to make if you're comfortable using tools. The other choice, if you're interested in purchasing one, I've seen lyres which range from everything from around $200, maybe even lower than that, to up above $2,000. There's a lot of differences between them, and some of them are just, well, how much do they actually resemble a period, the period designs? So it's much like if you order a $200 helm and you order a $2,000 helm, you're going to hope that the $2,000 helm is going to be a little more both well constructed and also accurately represent what a period design. One of the other common things that's chosen is whether or not to use a wooden peg or a zither pin. The zither pins have the advantage there. You can easily turn them with a standard zither pin wrench, but there's no evidence of a metal pin. They're also not tapered. So there's a couple different, and so they look a little funny on an early period instrument, but they're relatively cheap and they really hold well and easily move. What the lyre's made of is also going to be varying. I have seen all kinds of different materials. Again, the ones that have been found, the choices are really oak, maple, and pine. And on the continent, it seems to be there. The Trossingen is maple and maple. So the body is maple, the soundboard is maple, and I'm trying to remember. I saw the list and I was trying to find it and I couldn't find it before this class. It was typical for the ones on the continent to be one way and the ones on the island to be the other way, and that is body made out of maple, soundboard made out of oak, or body made out of oak, soundboard made out of maple. And I'm not sure why that was different. So also what level of ornamentation. So there, you can buy a reproduction of the Trossingen, which has all of that ornamentation from the Trossingen done. I've also seen a version of the Sutton Hoo, which has the ravens that are those brasses. Raymond's Quiet Press basically makes those brasses that are from the Sutton Hoo lyre. And the other thing that's changed is what the string material is, whether it's steel, whether it's nylon, Nile gut, or gut. Steel string are convenient because you can use modern guitar steel strings to them. However, they don't. You can't just tie a steel string onto a tailpiece or to the bottom nut, and so sometimes a steel lyre will actually have it will be strung like a modern electric guitar. It actually has through going holes that are pulled through from the back. Not a period construction technique, but I've seen that done with a number of the lower price lyres that are available on Etsy. Um, so those are the primary differences you'll see, just and also just quality of manufacture or of the lyre maker's ability. So Jan van Capel, for instance, makes very very nice instruments, but they're pretty expensive. I don't even know how much. I've never seen what his price on one. I've seen other ones that go, as I said, up over $2,000 for a well-made Sutton Hoo, well ornamented, or a well ornamented, properly put together Trossingen. Question: is there a sound tone quality between different woods? Um, there is. I can't tell you exactly because a lot of it's the shape of the soundboard too. Um, Soundboard is fairly thick in the middle because there's no, unlike a modern guitar which has support behind it, there's no support behind the soundboard, so it's thin towards the edges, thick in the middle. And I've been told that maple is brighter. I think brighter. I know that if you can use a spruce soundboard much like a modern guitar, and those tend to be a lot brighter and crisper, but they may not be the appropriate sound. um, with that, I think I'm actually at the end of my slides and at the end of the material I'd intended to cover. So at that point, if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to take questions. We're about 45 minutes here, so we have time. So if anyone has questions or wants to know a little bit more specifics about things, you can unmute yourself and ask or type in the chat.
Yes. Go ahead, my lord.
Oh no, after you.
Yeah. Okay. In your map handout,
Yep.
you're showing all of the lyres found either in Britain, um, Germany, Scandinavia.
Yep.
Anything regarding Celtic countries?
Um, there's nothing. There's no finds. There's no pieces of them found in digs in Celtic countries that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then, kind of in a similar vein to that, this could be a little bit more of a general question, but when it comes to where exactly we have found these, were they something that originally came from the Anglo Saxon side of things and migrated over to Germany through cross pollination, or were they something that that was initially brought over with the Angles and the Saxons when they were initially invading?
Um, it's I really they're both the finds on both sides are old enough and they have distinct enough differences that um, when you look in what the parent instrument is, well, a Greek lyre is, you know, again similar number of strings. They have a different construction on the. They typically have a, a dowel instead of a yoke on the bridge, and they often will have hide or a soft soundboard instead. So there's similar instruments that are the parent instrument of this, or older instruments of the lyre. And I don't know if there's really any understanding whether they were going from one side to the other, or whether the continent to island or island to continent. I haven't seen enough indication for that. I haven't done the. There may be something on it. I haven't done the reading on that far. Sorry.
No worries at all.
I just haven't come across it if it is there yet. There are actually a number of really good musicologists who've been studying. There's a gentleman at Cambridge who's published a lot of things on the different. He's part of the music department there, who's published a variety of different things, papers going back. There's a number of archaeologists who have published on this, and I haven't gone through. I mean, there's for each find there's a full publication on the find. On top of that, there's also people's critiques on how it's done, or how well they actually understood what they were looking at. So there's a question here: when putting away the lyre, should you relieve the tension? I never do, partly because it sits out on my chair out here most of the time, so I can reach over and play it. Partly because gut strings, once they stabilize, I don't want to try retuning that thing. It takes me a long time to retune it. There's another question here. Aside from plucking and strumming, what about bows? Thinking about the tagelharpa, which I see is called a lyre as well. So the reason why you wouldn't expect a bow on this type of instruments has to do with the bridge. So anything that's bowed typically will have a curved bridge so that you can play in individual strings. Right now you can only play all the strings at once, or I suppose you could damp them, but there are bowed lyres. Typically a bowed lyre only has 3 strings. And so a bowed lyre with 3 strings is then you can play 2, and I think it typically has a bridge which is slightly different. So it's a similar but not the same instrument. And bowed lyres were actually you actually played them by basically blocking, but instead of blocking, what you're doing is shortening the string length. So trying to go through. Creamhilt, what was that you were saying about the you wanted to speak to, or for the locations where migration directions? Is that what you're talking about?
For my question, or
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. So yeah, Creamhilt's comment: the Trossingen and Oberflecht are Alemannic lyres, and which are the Germanic tribes that lived in different areas there. So again, most of these are so Trossingen is migration era. So a lot of the other finds are all Scandinavian. The Scandinavian finds tend to run later. It appears that in England they really stopped being used. There's I've seen some discussion about, well, when you have an outlawing the harp, you also see outlawing the lyre at the same time after the Saxon invasion, or the Norman invasion. So I've seen references to that. I haven't chased that down.
oh wow.
Other questions?
Now that you actually mentioned, I do have like one other completely tangent question that's completely unrelated to like the migration patterns and whatnot.
Yep.
And this is coming from a completely novice perspective. How often would the lyre, at least in the Germanic or the English traditions, be played as a solo piece as opposed to an accompaniment to a spoken word story or a song or something to that effect?
I don't know that there's really much information about that. I have seen some discussion about I haven't gone through and read. There's a paper by Newell which goes through and actually assesses the role of the lyre in poetry and in literature, and he goes through examples where it's referenced in literature and referenced in and what was done with it. And I just glanced over it and I pulled it down, but I haven't actually dug into the paper yet.
Very good.
Newell's the person who's at Cambridge, a musicologist at Cambridge. I said that would be a place to go look.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yep. So the example Bagby's Beowulf is one where it's used for declamation as an example of a performance. I've seen it used as declamation. I've seen it used, basically to play a chord or play a set of chords, melody, and then spoken with it. I've seen, people have interpreted it different ways. I don't know if there's a really good set of understanding of what was done in period. Other questions? Well, if not, I will go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and play one piece here really quickly on the lyre, give you an idea and sing with it. This is actually a 12th century piece, so it's probably too late for the lyre. It's the Palestinian Lied, which is a Minnesänger song. And so this would be an example of one way you might actually use this. Allererst leb ich mir werde sinnen sondig Auge sieht, das hier Land und auch die Erde, der man so viel darin geht. Es ist geschehen, dass ich bat, ich bin gekommen an der Stadt, da Gott menschlichen trat. Now my life has gained true meaning since these sinful eyes behold holy land with meadows greening, whose renown is often told. I have won my lifelong prayer, I've arrived in the country where God as human did appear. Christen, Juden und die Heiden, jeden das ihr Erbe sei, dat Gott muss es zerecht erschieden, durch die Sinne Namen drei. Heil du Virtus treutet hier, wir sind an den rechten Gär, recht ist, dass uns gewährt. So that's actually the parts of the Palestinian Lied, which is a 12th century Crusader song by Walter von der Vogelweide, one of the probably most famous of the Minnesänger. So with that, if anyone has any questions, again, I'd be happy to sit around and talk. Otherwise, I think we're at an end for the class.
Anybody have any more questions?
I don't have any, but I just wanted to say thank you again for teaching a really great class.
Thank you.